For your next sessions. Okay, great. Okay, shall we start, everyone? Is that okay? All right. First of all, let me just quickly introduce myself, then I have a question for you before we start the presentation. My name is Victoria Clark. I work for the British Council and I manage their global assessment solutions around the world. So, that's me. Very quick question to all of you. One of the themes of this conference is mediation from the CEFR. I have a quick question to all of you. Is there anyone here who feels they understand mediation? There's one, a couple of people put their hands up. Great. Okay. Now, we'll talk about the importance of mediation later. Let me just tell you how we're going to carry on for the next 45 minutes. The first thing I want to do is try to define mediation for you, because it's a little bit confusing sometimes. The next thing I want to do is talk about, in the real world, the types of contexts where mediation occurs and how that has influenced the CEFR. Okay? Then the next part is where mediation plays in language proficiency. Okay? And more importantly, I'm going to try and talk about the way that in the CFR we've shifted from the 4 skills of reading, writing, listening, speaking. We no longer talk about that anymore. We've shifted to the 4 modes of communication, which is reception, production, interaction, and mediation. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, okay, to make that clear to everyone. Then I want to give some examples of mediation tasks in countries such as Greece, Spain, as of this year, which is where I live, Greece, Spain, Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and I'm missing a country. Mediation is now compulsory in high-stakes English tests. Okay, and I think it's coming your way. Okay, so it's an important topic. And then finally, let's just discuss some of the challenges around mediation that we're finding. So if I may, let's make a start. Okay. So, just quickly read that. I'm not going to read for you, and I'll explain it. Okay, mediation is about access. Access to information that one person has and the other person doesn't. Now, that reason for the access, let's say I have information you don't, it might be simply that I speak a language you don't. And let's say I don't speak any Italian, apologies, I live in Spain. So my colleagues who do speak Italian are going to be able to translate a little bit for me, or give me some ideas, or explain some cultural concepts for me over the next 2 days. I don't have access to written or spoken texts in Italian. I also don't have access to anything technological because I have no idea. I married an engineer, so I didn't have to think about it. Okay, I'm a linguist, that's it. So access doesn't have to be linguistic. Now, we've just come back from, my colleague and I, we were in Bulgaria last week. I'm just trying to think where we were the last week before.
Bulgaria.
And before that, no idea. So we have cultural issues as well in countries where we don't have access to understanding their culture. And children in a classroom don't have access to information because intellectually, or they haven't learned it yet. So mediation is around access. Someone has the information and needs to supply it to someone else. Now, one of the important things here is the word facilitation and reconstruction. Reformulation, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the idea of creating bridges, sometimes within the same language, as I said, technologically, I have no idea. So even in English, somebody might have to simplify something to me or give me loads of examples if they have to try to explain something technical to me. And that's within my own language of English. The other one I wanted to point out is you are not concerned to express your own meaning. This has nothing to do with what you want to say. You are providing access you are facilitating ensuring successful communication to someone or some people else, others. Now, usually, and as we go back to that definition, I'm quite happy to send these slides if anyone wants them, you can come and ask me for it. But one of the concepts here is the idea of reformulation of a text. Often in mediation, it's from one source to another. What do I mean by source? For example, my boss lives in France and speaks no French at all. Typical British man, he only speaks English, okay? Now, if he gets an email, he'll send it to me, I'm half French, and I'll just, get on the phone and say, right, Jonathan, you need to do this, this, this. So from the written text, I'm now calling him. Or it could be a telephone call with the tax office in France, and then I email him what he needs to do. It could be something I've heard, it could be something I've read, and then I will write or speak. So the idea is sometimes it's often between two sources of text as well, which is what we do in everyday life, and I'm going to talk about it in a minute. So the idea about mediation is about access. You have access, and you need to supply someone with that access, because it could be linguistic problems, it could be cultural non-access, i.e. we don't understand the culture, it could be technical, it could be intellectual, or it could also be viewpoint in itself. Okay, so in the real world, we're talking about, not yet in the CFR, in the real world we see four major contexts where mediation takes place. Okay, linguistic, social, cultural and pedagogic. So let's have some examples. When we have linguistic mediation, we have two types. One is between languages, interlinguistic mediation, and one is within our own language, intralinguistic mediation. So the first one's quite clear. Let me give you an example. Okay, my colleague here doesn't speak French, okay, and she's allergic to fish, all right? Now, we're in a French restaurant, I have a menu. So, clearly, she says, what's on the menu? This is not about translating the menu. It is not about a translation, word for word, going through the menu. What I do know is I'm not going to talk about the fish dishes. She's allergic to them. I'm not even going to talk about the dish that has a shrimp sauce, just in case. I also know she's fussy and doesn't like very fancy food, so I'll try and pick, chicken, grilled chicken with potatoes. So what I'm doing, and this is really important, is I am choosing information from that text to give to that person so they have successful communication. In addition to my choosing, because obviously I'm not going to translate the fish or the shrimps, etc. In addition to my choosing, I'm going to expand a bit, because I have cultural knowledge. So I know that this sauce, that is the name whatever, is just a cream sauce with some mushrooms. And I also know, because I read recently, that all the meat from this restaurant has been sourced or produced or bought locally. So I'm adding some information. And that's a really important concept of mediation, is it's about choosing what's relevant to that person or persons you are trying to provide access of information to. So it's understanding the context, the person and persons. And it doesn't just mean translation, it can also mean adding information, expanding. Okay? So, of course, we're quite clear, interlinguistic mediation occurs, as you know, every single day. Okay, especially for those who travel. I've got a picture of an old lady with her daughter at the doctor's. Now, unfortunately, if anyone's my age or nearabouts, we have this problem. You go to the doctor's with your parents, okay? And let's say you speak the same language as the doctor, okay? And you come out to the doctor's and your mother or father would say, what did they say? Now, this has nothing to do with language per se. We're all of the same language. And then you, and I'm sure you're all the same as me, you choose what you want to tell them. Some things you miss out. So we're simplifying it into perhaps less technical jargon, or perhaps it's a bit too much for them, etc. So that's within one language. So even within our own language, we have to mediate. We have to provide the information to that person. We have to provide access to it. Now that could have been a technical barrier. It could also have been a psychological barrier, because they were a little bit frightened or scared or confused. So the idea of mediation is to cross over the barriers where someone does not have access to the information, and you have to mediate it as a bridge. It's not your own meaning, it's the mediation. So in linguistic mediation, we have inter- and intra-linguistic mediation between languages within our own. Also, there could be dialects or registers within our own language which may be difficult. If anyone's been to Newcastle, yes, or Scotland, Scotland's still in Europe, I can't remember if you're... Okay, then of course there may be some barriers there, even if it's our own. And again, register, someone who's extremely, say, well-educated, may have some linguistic barriers to someone who's perhaps less educated. A bit of a terrible example, but there you go. Okay. Cultural mediation, we've all travelled, I think that's very clear. The British Council, as you know, is probably works in over 200 countries in the world. We have 125 countries where we have offices. So as soon as we get to the British Council in a country, our team give us some cultural background, do's and don'ts. Okay? Because we have a diplomatic side, we have a commercial side. So even though I work for the commercial side, we still have to respect our diplomatic side, so we need some clear indicators of do's and don'ts. When we go to a meeting, my colleagues are next to me saying, don't sit there, stand back, let him sit down first. A constant running commentary of what we need to do, because I have to have access to that information I don't have. Okay. Now, social mediation, there we are, ladies and gentlemen, divorce lawyer. This is what I've got. Okay. Now, differences or barriers don't have to be linguistic or cultural. They can be viewpoints. Here, I'll give an example of sort of conflict resolution here. Okay, two divorcing couple who's divorcing, I don't know, the mediator, the divorce lawyer is trying to find common ground, trying to get agreement, trying to diffuse an angry situation. They're mediating, because two viewpoints, two stands, and then the rest of it. Okay, and finally, pedagogic mediation. This is what parents, teachers, mentors do. We can see that children need access to information. It could be a chemistry lesson that the kid doesn't understand or has just started. Introduction to, I don't know, I don't even know anything about chemistry. I can't even give an example. Or physics, something to do with physics, tides, moons, if I remember. Okay. Now, obviously, the teacher's got a couple of things he or she has to do. They've got to get the information, bridge it to the student. They've got options. They can simplify the book a little bit. They can expand upon the book with loads of examples. They can do a song, a dance, a game. It doesn't matter. The idea is they have to bridge the information, because intellectually or knowledge-based, the kids do not have that information. So it's the teacher's or mentor or, say, parent's job to bridge that. So I think we all know what pedagogic mediation is, because we do it every day, right? Quite clear. Okay, so that's where mediation occurs in the real world. Okay? So, where does it fit in the CFR, in language proficiency? Well, at the beginning of my talk, I mentioned the fact that we have, not rejected, that's the wrong word, we have shifted away from talking about listening, speaking, reading and writing. I'm not saying they're not important, they are. I'm going to explain to you that in the CFR, there is a realisation that these 4 skills are not enough to explain the complexity of everyday communication today. Okay, so what we've done is we've shifted to perception, production, interaction, mediation. So let me tell you how that all fits together. if I may. You'll find this in the CFR document 2001. Just to point out, mediation is covered in the updated, extended version of the CFR published in 2018. Okay? So, but this was already mentioned in 2001. So what have we got? First of all, reception, as we know, is reading and listening. Okay? The receptive skills. Production is writing and speaking. So there you are. Here's our 4 skills. Okay? That's why we're saying it's not enough to explain communication. So what's interaction? What's mediation? That's the question. Let's go to interaction. Now, if I may, I'm going to talk to myself. Married ladies, we do this every evening when we go home to our husbands because they don't listen. So you'll know exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to have a conversation with myself and my invisible friend. Okay? Good morning. Good morning. How are you? I'm fine. What are you doing today? I'm going to the cinema. I saw Batman last week. Batman's great. He's my son's favourite. Okay, highly interesting conversation. So what is that? Well, first of all, what's important is it's the sum of reception and production. Someone's speaking and the other person's listening, and then the other person speaks and the other person listens, right? But there's more. If you remember, in my conversation to myself, I mentioned the cinema, and that prompted my invisible friend to talk about Batman, which prompted me to say he was my son's favourite. What is in addition to reception and production, or the 4 skills, is this co-construction of meaning. In interaction, which is always between 2 or more persons, there is a co-construction of meaning. If you notice, I didn't say, when my invisible friend said, I'm going to the cinema, I didn't say, the CFR has 4 modes of communication. That wasn't my reply. I was not trying to push my point across. We were co-constructing the joint construction of meaning, which is what interaction is about. Your topic influences my response. Also, linguistically, the structure you use, your grammatical structure, vocab, a lot of your devices, will also influence mine, because I'll probably borrow from them to allow me to be more fluent. So there's a whole borrowing and joining and constructing together in interaction. So can you see, you feel that the 4 skills do not adequately show that. And then there's more. Mediation, as you can see, seems to be the elongation of those 3 modes of communication. Why? Because first of all, mediation includes at least 2 or 3 of those. Okay? And secondly, mediation, remember, is not just about communication, it's about access to, facilitation of, successful. And that's really important. So, if in interaction I did say, after someone said, I'm going to the cinema, and then I did say, CFR has 4 modes of production, interaction, and then the other person said, I don't know the CFR, and then also in mediation, then there's not successful communication. No one is actually going on in that conversation to access any information. So mediation is that sort of, how do we say it? The missing link. That's what it's been claimed as. We can talk about that at the end of if that's the truth. But they're seeing it as the missing link in communication. The idea of making sure that the communication is correct for the recipient, is accessed by the recipient, for whatever reason, linguistic, social, pedagogic, etc. So that's why this relationship diagram you'll find in the CFR looks like that. Okay, so you've probably seen this in the CFR. Let me explain to you what the CFR, I think everyone knows about the CFR, okay, we've all heard of the CFR. Well, in the CFR, it's not just about descriptor scales, global scales. The CFR actually tells us or gets us to reflect on how languages are learned. Okay, so let me explain how the CFR explains to us how languages are learned. So first of all, here are the can-do statements for the 4 modes of production. Okay? Right, here are the, if you know all the descriptor scales, they're here. So what the CFR says is, when you have to do something, okay, let's say, for example, can write an essay coherently on a full range of topics, support your ideas, etc., etc., etc. Okay, that will be, say, B2 in production, overall written production, say. Okay, what it says is when we do a task, when we do an activity, here's another activity, planning your friend's birthday party. When we do these tasks, right, an essay, planning a party, then what happens is we employ general competences as well as communicative language competences. Now, general competences are not language specific. They're your background knowledge, what you know about the world, okay, what you know about your own culture and how things happen. When you go into a restaurant, we know they're going to give you a menu, you know you're going to order, you know you're going to pay. General competence, that's about what we know. This is about what we can do. You can do many skills at work. You can also drive a car, most of you. You can do this. This is what you can do. This is who you are. Are you confident? Are you motivated? Are you a risk taker? Are you an excellent communicator? Or are you shy? And here is how we learn. Are you a good learner? In general, of things, not just language, but you know, do you know how to study well? Do you have ways in which you can guess words in context or even in your own language? Okay, so these are general competencies that have nothing to do with foreign language. But when we are planning a party or writing an essay, then we have to activate our knowledge of the topic for the essay. For the party, we have to know that in a party we have to have invitations, cake, friends, balloons. We also have to know that it has to finish before 10 o'clock because our friend's mum is a bit strict. We also know that, you know, we have to book some Ubers. Okay, so when we do a task, we employ general competences. We also employ communicative language competences. Now that is your grammar, vocab, social linguistic, pragmatic knowledge in foreign language. So that is your vocabulary for English, party, balloon, wrapping paper, sellotape, card. That is also, again, the social linguistic knowledge that in my culture, in English, you must bring a birthday card. Yeah, which is always a problem when you live abroad, because some cultures don't have birthday cards, and we struggle as Brits to try and find a card for our friend. Yeah, so we just buy loads at Christmas when we go back. Okay, so there's social linguistic knowledge, there's vocab, there's obviously my fluency, accuracy, grammar, etc. So, when we do an activity in class, we use general and communicative language competencies, right? And at the same time, we'll use some strategies. What do I mean by strategies? Okay, well first of all, you may not have the language or all the grammar, or all the vocab, or all the social linguistic knowledge, right? So you have to employ some strategies to get over that. So if you're giving a presentation like I am in class, now in order to keep, perhaps, make sure you keep going so you don't stop and try and think of words every 2 minutes, then you have to either, you know, paraphrase, use an alternative word, perhaps avoid that word or grammatical structure, always a good strategy, guess. So we have to employ strategies. And here's the idea of the CFR. In order to learn languages, we need to perform activities and tasks. Why? Because they force the use of general and communicative language competencies, and at the same time, we employ strategies. The more tasks we do, the better we are at employing, using using, activating these competencies and employing, using appropriate strategies so that when we leave the classroom, go in the real world and have to perform a task, the idea of the competencies being employed and strategies being employed is easier, is better. And the more we do it, the better we become at it, which is why the CFR advocates a communicative, task-based approach to language teaching and learning, and dismisses, rejects the grammar, structure-dominated curriculum, because that doesn't help us to activate our competencies or to employ strategies. And when we're out in the real world and I have to write an email in French, or I have to order a meal in German, or I have to, I don't know, explain to a policeman why I'm speeding in Spanish, then I have to employ these competencies and strategies. But if I don't practice them in class, I end up failing. Okay? So that's what the CFR says about language learning, okay? And the idea is that we should, because these are the four modes of communication that explain complex communication today, we need to do tasks that are around reception, production, interaction, and mediation. Okay? So, let's have a look. Sorry, let me go back, sorry. As you know, there are multiple descriptors, the can-do statements, in the CFR. In the 2018, the CFR introduced 19 descriptors on mediation. They looked at the context outside in the real world, do you remember? Linguistic, social, cultural, pedagogic, and they came up with three main areas. One is mediating a text, one is mediating concepts, and one is mediating communications. Okay, I'm going to go through each of them in detail a bit now. So these are the 19 additional descriptors that have been added to the CFR in 2018. So if I may, no, again, so I go back. These are what they saw as basically including all the context that we talked about. So let's start with mediating a text. Here is about having access of one text source to another. So in other words, someone else does not have access to that text. And again, it could be possibly linguistic reasons, it could be cultural reasons, it could be intellectual reasons, but the idea is someone does not have that access and you are passing on that information. The descriptors include relaying specific information, data, processing, translation. Okay, what does that mean? This one is what I mentioned about the French menu. I chose the relevant information to give to my colleague who doesn't like fish. Okay? This one is seeing a graph, pie chart, some sort of visual information, and relaying that. It could be from A1, A2, it could be a weather report. Yeah? Sunny, rainy, up to obviously C2, it could be something complex like in a journal, statistical analysis, the results part of a journal article around some sort of a language-based research. Processing the text here is around summary. In this part, we don't need to know the whole text or give my colleague here the main ideas. I just have to pick relevant information in this part. Here, I need to give him or her the main ideas that are relevant to him. So I, as the person who has access to the text, need to understand the full text and the actual ideas of the text, and then I can choose. Remember, mediation is a lot about choice. Then I can choose which of those main ideas are relevant to my colleagues. So if I read, it's exactly what I've done now, everyone. I've read the CFR documents for you. Well, not just for you, obviously for my job, but I've read the CFR documents, I have taken all the main ideas, and I have decided, chosen, based on the audience, what I think you need to hear. So that, I haven't just gone and quickly scanned and had a quick look, I processed the text. Now be very careful of this word translating, because it does not mean formal translating. This means the stuff we do in real world. When we're in an office, the Italian colleagues are talking to my colleague, and I say, what do they say? She's not going to give me a formal translation with all the nuances